Rolls-Royce has been curated around the complex matter of identity rendering in the South African context. Looking at South Africa's traumatic politicized past, issues such as race, gender and culture have played major roles in our art production over the past 2 decades. Frikkie Ekstein of Pretoria says, the idea for the artwork was sparked by my own interests in how we modify the natural world to suit our needs, especially when the changes or improvements we make depart from an evolutionary goal. Plant species, for example, produce flowers with unique features induced by the ecological variables of their circumstances. A certain color pattern or fragrance in a flower attracts an indispensable kind of attention that guarantees its continued existence. Extensively hybridized flowers, however, exist purely for aesthetic whims or curiosity and have moreover become important social commodities. The key idea is that these plants have no direct equivalent in nature, and I have often wondered whether a pollinator can be found that will be attracted to their commodified signals. The video installation is a mock-up for a series of anticipated artworks concerned with hybrids and biological science systems. If I had to describe the look and feel of the work, I would say that it knowingly confuses National Geographic popular scientism with Disney feel-good aesthetics. Adele Oldfield of Johannesburg says, in contemporary culture there is a bombardment of images of the perfect woman who is usually portrayed as weighing at least 20% less than her height requires. She rarely looks older than 25 and has no visible flaws on her skin. Such media portrayal is a stereotypical blueprint no longer enforced solely by males, but by women themselves. The work on show deals with society's idealization of and preoccupation with the female body as seen through the female gaze. Made in collaboration with the Johannesburg-based fashion design team Strangelove, Johannesburg-based Leora Faber's Nemesis 2 comprises 15 photographic panels, die-cut to resemble a 3-way dressing table mirror. Using her body as a site of intervention, she seems to be engaged in the domestic task of stitching. Clothed in Strangelove's flesh-colored leather corset and full-length skirt, the images refer to the Victorian era in which needlework was considered a skill that virtuous and diligent young ladies should possess. The work proposes an analogy between the kinds of repressive values the Victorian woman was subject to and contemporary Western conventions of feminine beauty. Senzeni Marasella's work is a continuation of previous work, Theodora Comes to Joburg. In this work, she explores her relationship with Johannesburg and experiences that her mother had when she first arrived in Johannesburg. She used thread because it's fragile and can break easily. She also used objects that are found at homes, especially on dinner tables, so that she could bring closer the issues that her work attempts to address. In 2005, Bongi Benga of Johannesburg participated in an international artist workshop in Zambia in Chaminuka Game Reserve. This was a particularly inspiring experience for her, and she found herself using natural materials from the game reserve, leaves and bark, to create conceptual landscapes. This experience was reinforced by a recent participation in the workshop in the Ngong forest just outside Nairobi in Kenya in March of this year. This series of works represent both decay and renewal and echo Bongi's own experiences of homecoming and exile. Diane Victor of Johannesburg says about her work, "The barren hearts of those who presume that their presences are in any way permanent or timeless. Transient and temporary lives going up in smoke on a daily basis. Much of my recent work using carbon smoke deposit as a medium has looked at the fragility of the lives of those on the outsider fringes of our society. HIV/AIDS Day clinic users in Grahamstown, lost children appearing on the missing person sites on the internet locally, images of those killed through violence in our society. The three generic everyman figures drawn in smoke are as vulnerable and fragile as any of the others mentioned. The drawing medium implies the impermanence of our lives and the fragility of all life." The work of Corinne Zyman of Cape Town constitute an exploration of Lady Anne Barnett's life in the Cape Colony as wife of the first British colonial secretary from 1797 to 1802. During this period, she spent her time between her official residence at the Castle of Good Hope and Paradise, an outpost of the VOC, situated on the eastern slopes of Table Mountain. Throughout her time at the Cape, Lady Anne kept a journal and wrote many letters, especially to the British Secretary of War Henry Dundas, with whom she maintained a close friendship until his death. Lady Anne is also generally held to be the first white woman to have climbed Table Mountain in her husband's pants and with an entourage of slaves. As a historical figure, Lady Anne embodies a number of contradictions, at once liberal in view of her colonial context and a discriminatory slave owner, a pioneer and a socialite. It is this ambiguity that interests me, especially as a kind of cultural ancestor whose place in history is, like my own, highly contestable. As reflected in the title, the film of Winnie Morris is concerned with consumption. It begins and ends with a meal. Intercut into the narrative and disturbing the idyll of the pastoral form are references to the journey and homecoming of Sarah Baartman, the South African Khoi woman displayed in Europe in the 18th century as a supposed example of primitive sexuality. The film is built up of charcoal drawings that are filmed, altered, and filmed again. Each sequence is begun with a single charcoal drawing, which is modified by additions or erasures. Each alteration is recorded by 2 frames of film. In contrast to more traditional forms of drawn animation in which a new drawing or cell is made for each successive movement, this method allows for an entire sequence of events to occur within one drawing. The film was inspired by a tourist brochure in which European travellers are exhorted to taste the world. The subtext of the advertisement is that the world is out there for the you of the discerning connoisseur, the you of the aristocrat with excess leisure time. This third world is presented as a borderless consumer domain of unlimited choice, culinary, sexual, economic, and cultural. The famous Czech poet Milan Kundera has said, quote, "People are always shouting they want to create a better future. It's not true. The future is an apathetic void of no interest to anyone. The past is full of life, eager to irritate us, provoke and insult us, tempt us to destroy or repaint it. The only reason people want to be masters of the future is to change the past." In Nathaniel Stern's Serial Faces, he used a computer to limit data, to break down each iconic facial image into a limited gamut of colors. He then used this simplified pattern as a guide with other physical materials to recolorize and to retexturize the original image for a much more complex or enfleshed form of communication. According to Catherine Hales, author of How We Became Post-Human, quote, "At the inaugural moment of the computer age, the erasure of embodiment was performed so that intelligence became the property of a formal manipulation of symbols," end of quote, and consciousness became analogous to information processing. Nathaniel says that when we equate data as humanist, intelligence as machine-like, we efface embodiment. He refers to George Lakoff, author of Philosophy in the Flesh, who wrote that love, anger, and all the emotions we feel in our daily life cannot be separated from intelligence or consciousness. They are a necessary part of each other. The female figure is submissive, abject even, in the non-Christevian sense. Christevian abjectness, however, is also hinted at by the undergarment marked by flakes of a clay skin that she presents to her absent watcher, the male gazer whose presence is suggested by the empty chair. A discarded shoe hints at the fetish role. Curated of Pretoria works with issues such as identity, representation, displacement, xenophobia, and much of the political discourse that deals with Zimbabweans. His work explores various processes of the changing face of black representation, urban flux, and space reclamation. The work also delves into his own identity. His birth year is an important part of this exploration. Zimbabwe attained independence in 1980 and he was born in 1981. His generation was born into a post-colonial Zimbabwe and branded as born frees. But 26 years into Zimbabwe's independence, one has to question the freedom people enjoy. What does born free mean in the light of the country's current crises and human rights violations? He is motivated by the many Zimbabweans in exile in South Africa, their displacement, personal struggles to feed their families, and stories of torture haunt him.